If you haven't watched the previous video about persuasion and appeals, it would be a good idea for you to go back and do so. Just click on this link right here and go through and watch that, and then you can continue with this series that I'm calling the Tools of Motivation. And what this really is getting into process premises that target us psychologically. How do we get people to change their minds, or to add a new concept, or to purchase our product, whatever the case might be. And there's a million reasons why we might go through and persuade that way. This looks at some reasons why we do, four in particular, in fact, that I'm calling the process premises. And we need to have a pretty good understanding of how these work in order for us then to start applying persuasive theory, especially within the social media influences of the Russian reach, and in our study of radicalization as well. So those process premises, there are four of them. The first one is this idea of needs. And I'm going to use a theme as I talk about these. In the previous clip, let me go back one page here. In the previous clip, I talked about how proof doesn't seem to really be the cure-all for all of us in order to get us into compliance of whatever that persuasive idea might be. So there's a popular persuasive idea out there right now to not text and drive. And chances are you've done that within the last couple of days. We all do on some level, unless we've made some kind of firm commitment to not to. And there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of media out there to go through and pretty powerfully persuade us not to do it. And yet we still do it. We still do it on some level. So I'm going to use that concept as a theme as we talk about these four process premises. The first one being needs, and we might feel that we need to text because I need to tell somebody I'm going to be there in 5 minutes, or that I love them, or that we need some milk, or whatever the case might be, right? The second process premises is emotions. And man, we use emotions to go through and justify much of our manipulation and the things that we do. In fact, emotions are used to go through and persuade us not to text and drive. We see these horrible commercials of people being destroyed in these incredible car accidents, and yet we still get behind the wheel and we still go through and text. So emotions is the second process premise. The third one is this idea of attitudes. And that attitude might be, well, it's not going to happen to me. It'll happen to the other guy, but not me, and I'm not the other guy, right? So I'm going to go through and justify my being, or I'm going to signal there's no danger going on here. I'm able to go through and text. These attitudes are pretty complicated, and we'll get into their complications and what they do to us as far as how we're persuaded. The fourth process premise is this idea of consistency, or what I call certainty. We don't like our routines disrupted, and we will do much to go through and make sure that that disruption doesn't happen. And there are those purveyors out there who, or maybe even predators, who will go through and take advantage of our need for certainty. So those ideas, needs, emotions, attitudes, consistency, the four process premises. This particular clip is going to focus on needs, the first process premise. And there are a couple of approaches to this. One you already know of, a guy by the name of Maslow, and we'll get into him here in just a minute. But there's another, an author of the book, The Hidden Persuaders, a guy by the name of Packard, who taught that there are 8 hidden needs that we have, not only as consumers, but as people in relationships, people who are working and creating messages, whatever the case might be. And these are those 8 different needs that we have: emotional security, reassurance of worth, ego gratification, creative outlets, love objects, power, roots, and immortality. Now, you're going to want to write all these down, okay? We're going to go through all of these. You don't need to write them all down just yet, because I'm going to go through them all one by one. And like I said, these are Packard's compelling needs. This came out in the 1950s in the book that he published, The Hidden Persuaders, that started to dissect the whole Madison Avenue approach at changing the American psyche in terms of advertising. And to date, it's probably one of the most valid theoretical approaches out there. So let's dive into these, shall we? And we'll get into this concept of emotional security. And to show you how these work, I'm going to use some ads. Here's one that capitalizes upon this whole idea of emotional security. And maybe I need to define that. Emotional, we'll get into emotions here in just a minute. It's the security part really that this is getting into, and that is we don't want to have our safety disrupted, our way of life. And it sounds like the whole concept of continuity or consistency, certainty. None of these are mutually exclusive, okay? But they all work independent of each other, and they all work combined with each other as well. This particular ad capitalizes on that concept of emotional security, the idea here that you probably ought to wear a motorcycle helmet. Now, I'm a motorcyclist, and I have made a commitment to my family that it's all the gear all the time. But to tell you, living in Utah, where there's not a helmet law, it gets pretty tempting to not put that thing on, especially when it's 103 degrees and I'm down in Canyonlands and I'm navigating a trail or something that way. So this ad goes through and plays the antithesis of that concept. It says, I won't wear a helmet. It makes me look stupid. And this guy now has the mental acuity of a 2-year-old because of a brain damage that he sustained while not wearing a helmet. This one is a little more subtle in terms of what it's trying to do as far as emotional security is concerned. The headline, Hipsters Deserve to Die. Well, that should get your attention, especially if you happen to be a hipster. And then it gets into the claim if they have lung cancer, and then it goes through and talks about certain prevailing attitudes about that. And certainly this gets into some kind of an emotional appeal, because we're going to look at that, especially if we happen to be hipsters, and we're going to say, I don't agree with that. What are you saying? What are you talking about? And that will get you into the fine print, which is exactly where they want you to go. This one's a little more upfront here in taking advantage of certain emotional security ideas. Are you the head of the household? Are you a parent? Then, it's your responsibility to keep your family safe from everything that's been going on or anything that could happen that way. Here, the headline, if you plan to save your family, this bushfire season, your family needs a plan. It's interesting that this campaign came out long before California was being ravaged by wildfires. It'd be interesting to see maybe if they've changed their approach here from an emotional security, cognitive, and affective approach here persuasively with this campaign. But I think you get the idea. Reassurance of worth is next on Packard's compelling needs, that first premise of the process premises of persuasion. And reassurance of worth, what Packard means by that is that we like to know that we are valuable, that we are worth it, that we have some level of esteem. And who better to go through and capitalize on self-esteem than cosmetic companies? But Dove did something a little different with a campaign here a couple of years ago and came out with some contrasting ideas on what we might think beauty is, or what we might see how beauty correlates to the concept of self-worth here. So I'll go through these here one at a time, and you can see what it is that they're trying to do as far as changing prevailing attitudes. And I think it's fascinating. It's an amazing ad campaign here. Is there some reassurance of worth there, do you think? Dove users thought so as well, right? Ego gratification is next on Packard's compelling needs. We like to have our egos stroked. We live in now an entitlement society, which I think is an interesting term, but that we need to reward ourselves. We're just coming off the holiday season, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard, give yourself the gift of whatever, like give yourself the gift of Tag Heuer. I don't know why, but I want one of these watches. And it's not because it's like a Rolex, like it's a value thing or something. Tag Heuer happens to be a sponsor of certain motorsports that I follow. And so there you have the persuasive response, right? The persuasive activity that's happening in my own brain. And it's not because Tiger Woods wears one, or it's not because what's her face, or because of Leonardo DiCaprio, even though Tag Heuer is using these three individuals to go through and say, well, they deserve it, then so do you. That's how ego gratification works. we're persuaded to go through and say, yeah, I need to take better care of myself, which is interesting because that doesn't work with things like diet and exercise, right? Is it because we don't esteem ourselves enough to be worth the work, worth the effort? Something to think about. Next one is a little weird. Packard calls this idea of our needs that we have some level of creative outlets. Now, I indicated, I think, at some point that I'm a photographer and I'm a writer, and I have needs for creative outlets. And I guess camera companies can capitalize on my photographic creative outlet need by selling me gear. I'm constantly looking for new lenses, that kind of thing there. But I'm going to interpret this in a little different way, and that is that there are advertising agents, there are designers, that's even better. There are designers out there who capitalize on our looking for some type of creative outlet or something that takes creativity to a different level. LG did this. They're a manufacturer of appliances. They did this with a line of refrigerators. And they used food, they used an artist who used food to go through and create some classic artistic pieces like this one. I think it's Da Vinci or Michelangelo, I can't remember anyway. It's a sundae, it's an ice cream sundae, and you see the chocolate forming to go through and create that famous touch here, or the Mona Lisa made out of shrimp cocktail sauce kind of thing going on, or Scream made from pears and caramel. It's creative, and it gets us thinking a little bit here in terms, a little bit differently at least, as far as an appliance to go through and keep your food cold. Next is one of my favorites is love objects. We surround ourselves with these kinds of things. This kind of harks back to the idea of ego gratification, but it can extend into something that's a little more compulsive, into something that might be a little more, I can't think of the word, like our dogs. I have 2 golden retrievers, and they are my love objects that way. And if I'm looking for a brand of dog food that happens to have a golden retriever on it, guess what? They've got my attention. Or this. Someday, if I win the lottery, I'll own a 911, and not a new one because I can't afford that even with a lottery ticket win. But that's always been a love object of mine, and more so because of design, not necessarily because of performance, but I think you get the idea. And not because I feel like I'm entitled, that would go back to ego gratification. No, this is something that I truly, and this sounds weird, loving a car or loving a design of a car, but it's something that appeals to me. It's something that lights me up. I feel it in my solar plexus when I see especially the rear 3/4 panel version, or the view of a Porsche 911. Yeah, I'm weird, I know. Next is power. There are certain individuals out there who aspire to that. I don't necessarily, but there are ways to go through and appeal to that concept of power. Now, since I don't drive a 911, I do drive a Montero. And I used to have this one here that's in the image, which I think is interesting, that their concept of power is encapsulated in this theme of a rhinoceros. And I don't know if you know this, but rhinoceri don't see very well. They're not very sure-footed. The ad kind of blew itself, on this as far as being tough and powerful, but you get the idea, I guess. And it's not the reason why I drive Mitsubishi Montero, but that's a whole nother video we'll get into. There's this kind of power, and you can see how well this might backfire as far as the representation of the domesticated woman. Even though it is Rosie the Riveter flexing her bicep, we still have house cleaning products, and, well, this didn't do well there as far as that appeal is concerned. Or we have this appeal for power. I don't know what guarana does as far as giving it more energy and more power, but you see the idea, and you see how fallacious a lot of these applications here. Now, the next image I have coming up is going to have a little nudity in it, so if you want to zip over that, you can. Most of you now will start pausing as a result of this, and you'll probably be disappointed. But what's happening here is a power play or a power differential where the woman is in power. And this particular ad is for the clothes that she is wearing, and it is a reversal of an ad opposite of that of a male in a suit doing the same thing to a female. And this was this was an ad campaign in Europe. The power here is where those roles are switched. Next up is this idea of roots as far as Packard's compelling needs. Roots in terms of family, in terms of culture, in terms of our own identity. Dolce & Gabbana did a magazine campaign as far as their clothing is concerned, using the idea of family here, the concept of roots. And you can see within this, there's also the concept of culture going on. We like that adhesion. We like that concept of our people, of our culture, and that has some appeal to us. Last on the list here of Packard's compelling needs is this concept of immortality. And Evian capitalized on this with their campaign in putting out T-shirts this way, which I think are hysterical. I would love to have one of these, and I appreciate the fact that they were sensitive culturally to all different types of applications that go on. There's another company, though, that tied into maybe the antithesis of immortality to go through and get a point across. So this was an advertising agency who was promoting the idea that if you happen to be talking on a phone to somebody who's talking on a cell phone who's driving and they get killed, you are responsible for that accident. So this is that campaign. This was done in India. And you can see the graphic nature of this, but it certainly hit home. And in their research on this, they discovered that they reduced traffic mortality incidences with people talking on their phones by a pretty significant measure. So that's Packard's compelling needs. Let's talk about the other guy, Maslow. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here. I'm hoping you know these. The hierarchy of needs. Actually, Wi-Fi should be underneath physiological. But there's physiological, safety, belonging, esteem, and then it culminates into this concept of self-actualization. That's what I do want to talk about, because I think our smarter persuaders are involved in that top level. And you and I have been taught for the most part that it's not often that we get into that concept of self-actualization, but I'd beg to differ. So I looked this up. I did some research to find some terms that might go through and define what that concept means, self-actualization. Ideas like being accepting of others, being your authentic self, and being realistic, having a critical or a skeptical approach to what's going on, some level of autonomy, and being spontaneous, enough for all that to kind of culminate into peak experiences. You know people like this, okay? I'm like this. I have peak experiences. I strive for them, especially with my wife and my kids, in our adventures and the things that we do, the traveling that we do. And if you want to go through increase your peak experiences, you need to travel. But there are people out there that I esteem as well, that I see as self-actualized, like this guy, Jon Stewart, or my favorite author, Naomi Klein. If you've never read Naomi, I would encourage you to go through and do so. Or Tom Hanks, a remarkable actor, performer, or Coco Chanel, a French designer who created a fashion design empire, or Denzel Washington and his philanthropy, or Audrey Hepburn and her philanthropy, and what she did throughout her incredible life. We know her as an actress. Very few people know her for a humanitarian and an agent of social change. And then there's this guy, Barack Obama. He's probably the top of my list when it comes to individuals who are self-actualized. And that might have created some kind of response within you. But I'll get back to that here a little bit later on. So that's it for the first idea of process premises. The next one coming up for the next video, we'll deal with the process premise of emotions. So go ahead and click on that link there. That will take you into the next clip, okay? If you have any questions, you know where to find me.